Everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this webinar hosted by PowerAfrika Labs. The theme for today is sustainable construction, building smart, affordable, inclusive, and climate resilient housing. My name is Karen Mandera, and I'm an award-winning journalist and curator of the Forbes Africa 30 Under 30 list. And I'm so delighted that you guys could join us today. As the world turns an eye to sustainability, construction must follow suit. By 2030, 2/3 of the world population, about 5 billion people, are expected to live in cities. Rapid urbanization has brought enormous challenges: growing numbers of city dwellers, increased air pollution, inadequate basic services, infrastructure, unplanned urban sprawl. These also make cities very vulnerable to disaster. Making cities safe and sustainable means ensuring access to safe and affordable housing, investment in public transport, creating green public spaces, and improving urban planning and management in a participatory, inclusive manner. Today, we present solutions for housing challenges that cities are currently facing, from the prefabricated and smart houses by Fluxus, sustainable housing by NeedLab, financing and affordable housing through development financial institutions, and inclusive housing for persons with disabilities by PowerAfrika. Before we begin, let's have a word from the founder and the head of research from PowerAfrika Labs, who brought us all here today, Leonard Miyambo. Hello, Leo.
Thank you,
The
Karen.
floor is yours.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us on this wonderful webinar where we have amazing experts, mostly women, 99% women. I just had to represent the inclusive side. But we are gathering on to our International Women's Day next month, so I think this was part of like the hyping of the international recognition of women in sustainability as well. So I think what brought us here together is the idea that we had an experiment going on in the sustainable housing space, mainly focusing with persons with disabilities. So what we wanted to do was bring other people who have done incredible work as well in the space, that have worked with, sustainable housing, whether it be climate resilient housing, whether it be smart homes, and also try to cross-pollinate in terms of different ideas that we can push forward and highlight what's currently happening in the space, and look at the innovations and milestones that we're making. So PowerAfrika Lab is technically an urban lab. So to all those who did science in high school or in university, a lab is a place of crazy experimentation, mixing different solutions. But in this case, we're mixing ideas from different facets of the built environment to just experiment and see if we can come up with innovative solutions. For example, today we're talking about housing. So we looked at different facets. We looked at research. We looked at the engineering aspect of it. We looked at the technology aspect, art, the crafts, and just bring all those fields together to just come up with a concrete design and build space for persons with disabilities. So a lab is the best place to work. I think most of the panelists can agree with me here. It's one of those spaces you'd wanna just dive into and just go crazy about what you want to solve. So our focus mainly is just climate action, looking at a world where we preserve the natural resources we have, the limited finite resources we have for the future generations, because we believe cities are the problem and are the solutions as well. So by looking at urban labs like ourselves, we look at how best we can come up with these type of conversations that can then lead into actionable courses. So we discuss, then we action, then we show, then we actually present what we are going to be talking about today. Thank you, Karen. Over to you.
Thank you for that exciting intro, Leo. We're looking forward to learning a lot about what is happening in the construction space, especially looking at sustainability. Before we begin, I would like to also just introduce our amazing panel of amazing people that come from all over the world who are involved in making our cities and our homes a better place. So firstly, we've got Fan Yu Lin, the CEO of Fluxus. She's an award-winning entrepreneur and architect passionate about impact investing. She'll be telling us more about Fluxus, which is a construction technology company and a social enterprise. She initiated the World Home Foundation in 2020 to harness philanthropic power for tackling the global housing crisis, one of the biggest social, economic, and moral challenges facing humanity today. FANU serves on the World Economic Forum's Global Internet of Things Council to help shape the global agenda and steward the forum's efforts to build trust and advance public-private cooperation on IoT technologies. Then we also have Patience Muchawa, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at PowerAfrika Labs. She's passionate about redefining urbanization on the African continent by providing solutions to making cities more inclusive, sustainable, safe, and resilient. So she was recently selected to be one of the 2021 United Nations SDSN Youth Local Pathways Fellows and the She Engineers Mentorship Program. Then we also have Samira, who is the founder of NEDLab. Samira is an advanced architect and founder of NEDLab, Barcelona, Spain. NEDLab is a design research urbanization aimed at solving sustainability issues for communities using human-centric design strategies. She spends most of her time drafting human-centered design solutions with communities around the world. She has conducted workshops and built structures in over 10 countries. NEDLab is a nonprofit research and implementation organization, which is aimed at helping solve problems related to the habitat and urban resilience in cities and communities. Then we also have Veronica Jacarasi, who's the manager, climate, finance, and sustainability with Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe. She's currently supporting IDBZ sustainability standards and certification to the European Organization of Sustainability, the Sustainable Development. Veronica sits on a number of boards, including the Forestry Commission in Zimbabwe Sunshine Group. She has authored different academic papers and book chapters, including the climate finance, climate diplomacy, and gender and climate change. Then last but not least, we have Leonard Miyambo, the founder and head of research from PowerAfrika Labs. He is an experienced head of research and demonstrated history of working in the architecture and planning industry, skilled in persuasion, critical thinking, leadership, and applied sciences and public speaking. He's a strong professional with a diploma focused on sustainability, inclusive, climate resilient, and smart cities from Lund University. Now, I would love for our amazing panel to introduce themselves as well. Just tell us a little bit more about what it is you do. But before we do that, everyone that has joined in, please do drop a message in the chat group and let us know where exactly you're watching from. We'll also have a couple of questions that will go out throughout the session. Please just keep an eye out for that. And for now, just let us know where you're watching from. Tell us what kind of home you live in, whether it's an apartment, is it, a standalone house? Are you staying somewhere in an informal settlement? Let us know about that so that we can also incorporate that into our conversation today. So on to our panelists. Let's start with Samira. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your organization does?
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Leah, for the invite and for PowerAfrika for being so forward about the conversation on housing and urban needs in cities in Africa. I'm Samira. You gave a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that. I am an architect by profession, and then I started kind of traveling the world and saw most of the community's issues up front on the grassroots and started working with them and realized that it's a work far beyond just between the community and an architect who's interested. There needs to be green finance, there needs to be government involvement, there needs to be different stakeholders who are responsible for it. We need to advocate for policy change. We need to advocate for presence and acceptance from the people who are migrating to cities and forming informal settlements, that we need to think about this in an orderly way so they can have a beautiful life, and so can the city. And I'm having these conversations right now with Need Lab by participating in events like this and also building structures every day.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Samira. We're looking forward to learning more about what Need Lab does. And now on to Fanyu Lin. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization, Fluxus? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so glad we are here. And after listening to Samira talk about herself and what she does, I totally agree with everything. I think the synergy here is amazing. I myself is also a trained architect and a social entrepreneur. So Fluxus, as you mentioned in the beginning, is a construction technology company. We focus on housing, and we offer design, construction, consultancy, and technology solutions to deliver affordable and energy efficient and smart homes. So now it's really an exciting time for us, because as we see the new normal unfold, digital transformation becomes a strategic priority for many legacy industries, including construction, manufacturing, and infrastructure. So now we have the opportunity to advance global housing solutions through a smarter method of construction, and we see the potential to really turn housing into a driver for our social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Great to join this discussion with everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Fanyu. Looking forward to learning a bit more about the technology side of things, and how Fluxus is involved in using factory-based construction for housing. And let's have Patience tell us a little bit more about your role and your passion around sustainable construction.
Thank you, Karen. I'm also glad to be here, and we're glad as PowerAfrika Labs to be hosting you guys. I think I'm passionate about sustainability on the African continent. Even as we're labeled as underdeveloped, I think we are perfectly poised to actually start developing more sustainably. You'd find that I spent a year in the UK, and I realized that a lot of the work in sustainability they're doing is to try and sort of reverse some of the things that we looked at as development, as advancement, And so I'm really excited for the continent as a whole to redefine what urbanization has been termed before, and to direct it in a more sustainable way. And I'm glad to be working with PowerAfrika as the Chief Sustainability Officer. We've been doing a lot of projects, and there's a lot that we have in the pipeline, and I'm excited really for what the future holds. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Patience. PowerAfrika representing. And let's have Veronica tell us a little bit more about yourself, and talk to us about your role when it comes to sustainability and construction.
Wow, thank you very much. My name is Veronica Jakarasi. As already told, I'm currently managing our climate finance and sustainability department with the bank. In terms of sustainability and construction, I think managing a sustainability portfolio in the bank is one of my key areas of focus, especially to ensure how environmental and social safeguards are incorporated in the whole construction space, and how our infrastructure is becoming more climate resilient. It's becoming more sustainable in using natural lighting, and also using affordable materials in terms of design, but also without compromising quality. So incorporating key elements around the whole sustainability discourse from an economic perspective, environmental perspective, and social perspective in the whole infrastructure sector, and also reducing the whole aspect of incidences in the construction sector. I think it's one critical component. How do we ensure safety and health in the whole construction sector? And also in terms of, right now we're talking of COVID, we're talking of social distancing, but we have people who are still living in slums, So what does it mean in terms of our sustainability discourse in the construction space and in the housing, providing sustainable housing for our own people? So those are critical elements that we're thinking around. And when we look at post-COVID in terms of green recovery, those are the elements that we should be talking about. And I think this meeting will be basically critical to advance such discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Veronica. I think you raised some interesting points there, looking at the landscape in Africa and how a lot of us are living in what we call informal settlements. And how does that tie into the whole conversation when we talk about trying to shift towards a more sustainable living? And Leo, last but not least, the only man on this panel. So you'll be representing the men today. As we start our conversation, we'd just like to start with defining what exactly sustainable construction is and why is that important? Why is this an important conversation for us to have in today's society?
Thank you, Karen. And just bringing that into perspective, I'll use a key example. Using Zimbabwe as a case study, because most of the times we understand sustainability from, climate resilience, from climate action, from inclusivity and affordability. But right now, I just want to use a case study of the housing backlog in Zimbabwe and in South Africa to just derive what we mean by sustainable housing and sustainable construction. I think one of the most important things that, like for Zimbabwe, for example, we have a 1.2 million housing backlog, people on the waiting list waiting to be issued housing from the local authorities. In South Africa, it's 2.6 million. So when it comes to that part, there was a lot of opportunities within the private sector to come in and do projects. And one of them is one of the projects that happened 5 years ago by a local building society owned by an institutional investor, Old Mutual. It's called CAMS. So they call it the Buddhist housing project. Buddhist is a local high-density suburb in Zimbabwe. So they were trying to build low-cost housing. And one of the things that they did is, as a building society, they were going to offer mortgages. And in defining affordability, they had to use, the financial institution to then, get loans. And one of the striking things that happened is that there was low adoption of those houses because of financial inclusion in Zimbabwe. As we all know, Zimbabwe is 80% informal sector. And when you look at Zimbabwe, I define this term, people don't bank their money and take them from the ATM. They use what I call the UTM, under the mattress banking. So people would rather put their money in the pillow rather than use the banks. So with the issue of financial inclusion, the people that had been created affordable housing for didn't end up buying those houses. So they ended up opening the housing development to people in the diaspora and people who had the finances to buy and rent out the properties. So what you would find is that from the initial step of development, the idea of affordability was never defined. So you look at sustainability in a level where one came up and said, we can offer mortgages and offer affordable housing, but then it wasn't sustainable, although we can argue that it was sustainable. But then the affordability was not there. And this is one key that I learned from Need Lab, from Samira. It was the idea that when you look at projects and design, you have to look at the human-centered approach to design. And when it comes to sustainability, then this derives my point to say HCD, human-centered design, then becomes the pinnacle to sustainable designing. What is the ideal design for the person I'm designing for? So if it's low-cost housing, if you look at the context again in Zimbabwe, people don't buy superstructures. They like buying service stands, land, so that they can build their houses. So what they do is that they buy the stand and they use their own build as you earn, what I call build as you earn model. So the Bay model in locally, what it does is that as people earn, they build. So they start with the foundation, go to the rooftop level. So it can take them an average of 5 years to build their house. But there's a certain type of ownership that I own the land and I can build at my own pace. So you would find locally the affordable definition of housing then streams into the idea of how people build houses. So in a lot of ways, we want to create appetite for institutional investors to keep investing in this, housing backlog. But sustainability becomes key because you can invest $15 million worth of investment in 3,000 housing units and offer mortgages and spend for the next 5 years without adoption because sustainability was never defined. So sustainability is looking at the person you're building for, the impact it's going to have on that person. And it's going to look at the value chain. It's not just going to look at the person that they're going to have to build those houses. It's going to look at the constructors. So for example, again, local context. Building houses locally, people don't use construction companies. So if there is a major housing development that is being opened up in low cost or even high cost housing, what people do is that they outsource from their neighborhoods, technicians and handyman to start the construction. So builders are sourced within the community. It's rarely that you find a housing project being built by a construction company that is registered. It's mostly outsourcing of the informal economy within locally. So if we look at the value chain, are we implementing those sustainable practices within the traditional means of housing again? So sustainability has to look at the value chain, how it affects the system. Traditionally, again, and even currently in Zimbabwe, women are the project managers of housing projects. We all can recall, especially in Africa, the people that take the initiative to build the houses, the women. The men become sort of like the project manager as to sponsoring the housing project. It's like they know what the design they want, they know the type of structure that they want, and then in most cases in low-cost housing developments, you have the women actually cooking for the constructors locally here. So if we identify that, and this is one thing that we're key about, especially the projects that we're currently building now, is you look at the local economy, how it supports the construction projects and how we can sustainably advocate for it. Where we're trying to build our inclusive house locally, we have found that there are local men that are stone crushers for concrete. They actually house their operations near the site of the establishment. So what we have now is we tap into that type of economy. We will reduce carbon emissions based on the transportation we would have to use from a quarry site to the place where we want to build the house. So we now use people who use wheelbarrows. So it's now efficient and sustainable, especially for housing projects, because you are sourcing from them from locally. So sustainability, in my definition of this mouthful case study, is that it has to look into the value chain. It has to look into the workers that are going to come in. Would you get workers from a capital city doing a development in another city, or would you rather have them being sourced in that local city? We all know that the famous definition of sustainability is that energy is supposed to is supposed to be produced where it's consumed. So it becomes the localization context of procurement. What type of materials do you have locally? Would you rather have materials being outsourced from UK to come to Zimbabwe? That's a lot of emissions. What type of local materials can you use to advance your local construction? So for me, sustainability is the whole value chain. What are you doing at every level, not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but to support local economies? At the same time, what are you doing to support innovation? What are you doing to safeguard resources locally? And then this becomes a whole sustainability wheel where it starts turning because every structure is supported within. And then you get people now, instead of offering superstructures to local people who don't like buying superstructures, who like designing for themselves, you offer loans that they help build the superstructure in the approximate number of years that they build in regularly. So for me, sustainability is the whole value chain being supported from an economic, social, and environmental perspective.
Thank you for that, Leo. I think you pretty much summed up and unpacked a lot about what our discussion is going to be about, talking about the CO2 emissions, looking at the fact that sustainability should be about the people, a people-centric design, or what we say, a human-centered design. And that's something Samira knows quite well. Could you help us unpack that a little bit more from your part as the founder of Need Lab?
Oh, thank you. I think Leo did kind of touch upon all of that quite well. I think from what I've learned in the past 3-4 years of working in this sector and 10 years of architecture industry is human-centered design takes you to a certain level, which is asking people what they want, what they need in that community based on their daily traditions and what their activities are, and how can we fulfill their needs of happiness, of living in a shelter which protects them. Now we have a situation of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is rapidly reaching, and we have made promises in the Paris Agreement and coming up Glasgow one this year, where we have the need to also make this nature-centered, environment-centered. So right now that is, let's call it selfishly for our own future. Let's keep Earth safe, you know. So now it's encompassing also that what is good for my planet. For example, us building a lot of houses or increasing the amount of carbon emissions can make houses in Madagascar flood or sea level somewhere else rise. So we do have to keep a balance in what is needed, but also what are we using and emitting in that. Are we embodying carbon or are we emitting it? And how are we planning for that? And this really needs to go in, sink in, because 40% is coming from the construction industry and buildings today. We think of pollution, we think of just cars immediately, but it's construction industry, because we all, the same way we all need a transport, we all need a home. So that's one angle that I think when we're focusing too much on human-centered design, we forget about environment-centered aspects. So I think we do need to see okay, human, but the human in 100 years also needs Earth and all of that. That's part of it. And another point about human-centered design that I've noticed is informal settlements, relocation in programs like what Leo mentioned, are really unsustainable in the long term, because people have accustomed to living in this informal settlement, have access to jobs through that area, have neighbors there, have a community, have a sense of belonging. And due to housing development projects, you approve them and move them. Most of the cases, the people who live in these informal settlements are not involved in the conversation when a bank drafts up a proposal, local government supports the project, a construction company arrives and builds them. They're not consulted in terms of what they need and whether this relocation will be good for them, will they have job prospects there, and whether their needs are met. So I think it's important to bring in the stakeholder relationship with the settlement itself. Then the entire prosperity of that human population and unlocking the human capital happens, which again, the country benefits from. So yeah, I think if you look at everything from a little bit of economic lens, it makes sense in terms of this early investment.
Thank you for that, Samira. And I think just from what you said, looking at the fact that it's about keeping the earth safe, using what the resources that we have, natural resources that we have, from the natural to the economical to the social as well. Those factors should all be considered. And just before we had this, we started this panel, Patience was actually speaking around the same thing, looking at how we can include the social and economic factors when it comes to sustainability. So how do we start thinking about encouraging the everyday man, the person on the street, the person, who's in the village, who's literally off the grid and not really connected to any digital presence? How do we start changing the way we think about sustainability? Patience, maybe you can help weigh in on that.
Okay, so what I was talking to Karen about was just looking at sustainability as, thinking about the way we use resources. And I was given an example of land in Harare. I'll give Harare, Zimbabwe as an example. And how in the past few years, like if anyone has been listening to the news in Zimbabwe, they would know that there's a lot of talk about land barons that have been up for discussion lately. And so I was just doing a bit of research on, how the city was established. And I realized that when Harare was then Fort Salisbury, when the white settlers came, initially they were they wanted to make Harare like the industrial capital of the country. But then they realized that there was a lot of arable land around the city. So you have your Mazoe, your Nyabiras, your Maronde